Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Viviana Simos, your freelance academic, and this is Scholarly Pages, where I explain an academic term or a book in hopefully easy to understand language. Today we're talking about the world religions paradigm. The world religions paradigm is a topic talked a lot about in religious studies. And by religious studies, I mean a non-devotional, non-theological approach to the study of religion. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking that if someone says that they're studying religion, that they're either a priest or they have some connections to a particular religion. But the study of religion is typically, as I said, non-theological, which is the theologians are typically like the priesty type stuff. Not all theologians are priests, but anyway, but you're thinking about theologian and theological approaches to the study of religion. But religious studies is an interdisciplinary field that draws on history, sociology, anthropology, things like that, in order to study religion and the way that religion impacts society and people and individuals. So, what is the world religions paradigm? Well, the world religions paradigm is a way of categorizing and cataloging religion. Now, obviously, when we're talking about a study of a thing, cataloging, classification, stuff like that is going to happen. It's just kind of inevitable when we're talking about studying something. And religion is no different. The world religions paradigm is a way of classifying and categorizing religion based off of what are called world religions. Typically, the world religions presented are also called the Big Five: Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Those are the 5 religions that are considered world religions and that most people are thinking about when you talk about religion or when you go to study a religion course. That's probably your main headers on your syllabus. So that's actually the world religions paradigm. It's that simple. It is the idea that we structure and catalog religions based off of what are called world religions, and that all of these religions actually share a lot of stuff in common. That's what makes them a religion and not something else. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the idea of the world religions paradigm. So, as I said, the world religions paradigm has actually come about due to an interest in cataloging and classifying religions. Primarily, it comes from a study of comparative religion, but a lot of kind of early Western studies of religion were comparative in nature. Some of the very early ideas that are embedded in the world religions paradigm actually comes from Victorian England. I mean, there's going to be strands from even before then, but most of the ones that we can actively trace and direct energy to comes from Victorian England and scholars from that time. And because of this time frame that it's coming about from, there's a lot of emphasis put on the study of religion and the construction of the world religions paradigm that actually come from this time. Ideas like colonialism and a focus through a Protestant Christian lens. So an example of this would be a scholar by the name of C.P. Teal, whose work and classification and discussion about religion really focused on an idea of conquering. So, for example, he says, quote, "Ancient faiths and primitive modes of worship must either reform themselves as the model of the superior religion or draw nearer and nearer to extinction." So, in this, we can already see these ideas of colonialism. There is a superior religion in order to be drawing from. And again, yes, that superior religion would be Protestant Christianity. That's what they're talking about. And religions that do not look like Protestant Christianity are bound to fail because Protestant Christianity is the best religion in the world. It is the superior one. So obviously we see a lot of colonialist thought. We must conquer them. We must change things. We must save things by making them Protestant Christians. So you can see a lot of that kind of underlying idea there. There was also Max Mueller, who was around at this time, and if you are doing introductory courses to the study of religion, Max Mueller is a name that you will hear. He comes up quite a lot in those kinds of let's introduce the topic of religion discussions. And Max Mueller had a really huge focus on text. He was really into texts. And again, this is because of Protestant Christianity and Protestant Christianity's focus on text. You know, that was one of the arguments, one of the many, but one of the arguments for Protestant Christianity was we don't need a priest to teach us the Bible. We can read, we'll read for ourselves, and we can decide what we want to believe within this context. That's a really huge idea of Protestant Christianity. So texts became really important. Linguistics and conversations around text became a really huge point for Mueller about the study of religion, which then ended up influencing many more scholars afterwards to also likewise focus on text. So let's talk about some of the primary issues and critiques of the world religions paradigm. One of the big ones is that the world religions paradigm forces kind of a remodeling of religion that is following Protestant Christianity. We kind of see glimpses of this in the scholars that I mentioned before, and it kind of continues into contemporary times as well. There is a lot of focus on all religions needing to have very similar things. These things are beliefs, rituals, ceremonies, and customs. Now, this is something that you do still see today. While there are some people trying to dismantle this, which we'll talk about in a second, there is still an emphasis on world religions and world religions paradigm and kind of classifying and joining together a lot of elements of religion throughout the world. You know, for example, I did my undergraduate study in America, in Florida, and my introduction to religion course, I actually had a table that had religions across the top, again, the 5 big ones across the top, and then down it had things like main belief, primary deity, primary text. I had a primary text one. And, what's its most important ritual? What are some of its primary customs, like eating kosher or things like that? That would be stuff that I would have to fill out. And again, it's stuff that it kind of reinforces this idea that all religions have a primary text because I can fill that in across the board. All religions have this idea of belief. I can fill that out across the board. And that's not necessarily actually true. It's kind of a reimagining of some of the more complicated aspects of religion in terms that are easy for people that are coming from a background in Protestant Christianity to understand. So there's a quote from Simon Whiteman that I wanted to include as a way of kind of emphasizing this, where he's talking about Hinduism. Now, remember, Hinduism is one of the big 5 world religions, and this is what he has to say about Hinduism. Hinduism displays few of the characteristics that are generally expected of a religion. It has no founder, nor is it prophetic. It is not creedal, meaning it doesn't have any creeds, nor is any particular doctrine, dogma, or practice held to be essential to it. It is not a system of theology, nor a single moral code, and the concept of God is not central to it. There is no specific scripture or work regarded as being uniquely authoritative. Again, focus on text. Finally, it is not sustained by an ecclesiastical organization or an overarching church. Thus, it is difficult to categorize Hinduism as a religion using normally accepted criteria. So even though it's listed in the Big 5, it's described as a world religions, and I had to fill that out, and I'm sure many of you might have had to. Maybe you're watching this because you're having to fill it out for your course, where you have to fill out that table that goes across the board. Hinduism isn't actually all that easy to fill all that out with. There's a lot of really complicated elements in there that are not very easy to distill to the basics ideas that are presented based on the criteria of Protestant Christianity. Now, the other primary issue is that there are religions left out, because as I said, that's only 5 religions. And even though there are many different branches of those religions that you can chase after, there are also religions that aren't involved in that. And one of the biggest ones left out would be indigenous religions. Now, some people try to fix the world religions paradigm by adding indigenous religions as a section. So you no longer have just the 5, you might have indigenous religions and new religious movements tacked on as extra categories to put it into. But this is also kind of a problem, because if you say indigenous religions as a category, you're kind of lumping a whole lot of really different religions from all around the world as being in the same category. Indigenous Yoruba culture, for example, does not look the same as Inuit. Those are 2 very different groups, yet would be cataloged together under indigenous just because they're indigenous. It's also kind of tacking it on as a category rather than fixing some of the underlying construction issues that are present in the world religions paradigm as a general idea. Now, I know that some of you might be thinking that this sounds really interesting, but what does that really mean, and why does it matter to me if I'm not going to be sitting down to take an introductory course in the study of religion? Well, even if you've never taken an introductory course in the study of religion at a uni, the world religions paradigm is still affecting the way that you think about religion, because it has been so constructed in the Western culture to think of religion in these terms. Hell, even the fact that I was able to say indigenous religions, I'm sure maybe you've grouped some of them together in your head as well, when really they are vastly different from one another. Not all indigenous religions are the same. Likewise, you might think of religion as needing to have all of those things that I listed. Maybe you didn't realize that some religions didn't have texts, or that some religions didn't have beliefs as necessarily important. That might be blowing your mind, and hell, you might not even believe me when I say that. But that's because you have grown up in a society that has privileged these ideas as necessary in order for something to be defined as religion. So, the world religions paradigm influences not only the way that people teach religion at, say, a university level, but also the way the entire society thinks and feels and understands religion. So, what does this mean going forward? Well, one of the big things is shifts and changes to the way that people actually teach religion at schools. Now, this can be at a university level. For places like the US, we don't have religious education unless you go and take an introductory to religion course at your uni like I did. So introductory courses like those university ones are trying to change. I was teaching on one that instead was focusing on worldviews rather than on religions, which had its own set of issues, but that's a conversation for another time. But that's an example of somebody trying to shift from a world religions paradigm to something different. But also in some areas of the world, people are taught about religions even earlier than in university. And this is particularly the case here in the UK. RE, or religious education, is required at younger levels of education, for example, at GCSEs and in A levels. However, again, these are based on a world religions paradigm, which means that people that don't then continue at university levels will still be influenced by the world religions paradigm and the way that that constructs and thinks about religion. And not only that, but religious education here is also highly theological, so they're not really focusing on it in the same way that you would in religious studies. But that's, again, another conversation for another time. But basically, that's one of the things that people are trying to change, is actively campaigning for the system and the way of teaching religion to shift. So that way the new generations coming up don't have the world religions paradigm embedded in their way of understanding religion. But another thing is that we can't just kind of copy and paste a different system onto it. We kind of need to also shift our definitions of religion. And this is something that's going to be a hell of a lot more difficult than even changing the curriculum, which is proving to be very difficult. And this is because our construction, our cultural and social definitions of religion are often based on the world religions paradigm. It's based on that list, right? So I said that they all have to share common features, that it all has to have beliefs, they have to have rituals, they have to have ceremonies, and they have to have customs. Those are kind of this idea that we have of what religion is and what it means to be a religion. It kind of has to fit those things. But that's not necessarily true of religions in the world. And so we'd have to then shift our definition of religion. And that is something that not all scholars agree on. When you get into religious studies, everyone has a different definition of religion, which can make things kind of difficult to have a starting point. But also, that's just a really hard thing to do. But it's something that would probably need to change if we're going to change the system. So where can you read more? Well, I think one of the best books that you can pick up all about this is After World Religions, Reconstructing Religious Studies. This is an edited volume by David Robertson and Chris Cotter. This book kind of has, the first chapter is actually an overview of the history of the world religions paradigm. It gets into a lot more detail than I was able to do in this video. And they also talk about more of the issues presented in it and also some of the examples of how we can actually shift it. That's what the edited volume is all about. It is called After the World Religions Paradigm. So what does religious studies look like when we have progressed past this? And how do we progress past this? So it is an edited volume, which means that its readability kind of shifts from chapter to chapter. However, I do think that the first chapter, which is the one written by David Robertson and Chris Cotter, is actually fairly decent to read. I would assign it potentially to an undergraduate course, and I think that they would more or less get most of it. I think it is not too difficult to read. It's not too thick, but it does present you with a lot of information. So at the very least, I think that first chapter is really well worth reading, and you can actually find it freely available online. If you have trouble finding it, just shoot me a message and I can link it for you in a DM or a message or an email or something like that. So that is our discussion on the world religions paradigm. Hopefully I have explained the world religions paradigm well, and I will see you next time. Bye!